Chris DeLeon here of GameKeto, and what I want to do today is pass along this real simple, kind of strategic thought that I learned from my wrestling coach now many years ago, half a lifetime ago, that I have consistently found really helpful for when I'm doing game development. And this applies across the spectrum. This is part of how I teach. This is part of how I do art, programming, level design, you name it. And what it's about is not trying to learn everything. That it's way better to learn a few things well than to learn a lot of things shallow. And now let me base that in exactly what I mean. So the case my wrestling coach taught us to it in is that he said, there's people out there, there's coaches, where their approach is everyone, like every single week we're going to cover a different technique. Every single week we're going to cover a different kind of move. You're going to learn how to do different kinds of arm bars, different kinds of takedowns, different kinds of throws, different kinds of whatever. And what he said was, at the end of the day, the person who's going to succeed out there, whether it's wrestling, whether it's in what I've found a lot of places in life, isn't the one who is surface level familiar with dozens of different things that they can do. It's the person who has figured out there's a few things that in some combination they can get done whatever they're after. Okay, that and so in the case of wrestling, like he would focus on, let's find one takedown that works really well for us. Let's find one form of escape that we're going to drill. Let's find one form of, different kinds of pins or whatever that worked very well for us, and then we just drilled the heck out of them. Did them consistently, practiced them again and again and again, and we always kind of knew what it was going to be. And now you might think, so especially in the competitive sports realm, then the competitors can learn what you're doing, they can look for the weaknesses in it, and if you do it well enough, we had national level wrestlers on our team who they just did what they made up their mind to do so well, because they had practiced it so much and so hard that they just couldn't be stopped, right? And so here's where it applies. Let me bring it back to video game development, okay? In a tool like Blender, right, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of things you can do. A tool like Maya, a tool like Photoshop, hell, in programming, there are millions of things you can be doing at any given time. Or there's millions of ways you can do it, right? So here's a case where just today, on our club Slack for GameKeto Club, Tim Waskett, one of our European members, said, hey all, he's making this shooter. They have a World War I section of the game, courtesy of SPAD13. One of our, another European member built a plane for it. And he's like, hey guys, can we get a World War I tank? Like, here's this tank. He just wants a picture of, he has this idea. Here's a tank he wants to see, right? And so I just opened up Blender and I just cranked this out very quickly. And now, is it a high detail tank? No. Is it super great? No. But you're shooting at it from an airplane, right? It just needs to have the right silhouette and shape and general form. The game's going for a low poly art style. But the reason I was able to crank this out so quickly, and let me be clear, I'm not a 3D artist. I have no art training. I have no art background. But the point is that there's like 3 or 4 things I know how to do in Blender. Okay? I know how to do extrusions. I know how to do the knife tool to cut polygons. I know how to do a mirror modifier. And I know how to just drag points and edges and faces around. And with that set of 4 things, that's how I built this tank. Just those 4 operations. Never mind that there are tabs on tabs on tabs of other ways to do things. Never mind that there are just dozens of kinds of modifiers you can add in, all kinds of plugins on the internet, all kinds of techniques and ways to do things. That was enough. Just those 4 things were enough for me to build this shape quickly, which fit our need of, hey, all we need a World War I tank quick, because we have a update meeting and Sunday morning. And so I put that together for him very quickly. Right, so another case where this applies, we talked about there's a bunch of different ways to do things. Let's see, we were recently chatting about, I think this was actually random chat. So this has been making the rounds on tech forums lately. And someone posted their homework question, as they even call it homework question. He needs it to print smile 3 times and smile twice and smile once, right? And there's several very easy ways we can picture to answer this question. And the fun that the internet had poking at this was providing just hundreds of very obtuse, overly elaborate, overly verbose, overly structured, ways to leverage outside libraries, ways to format the code in very kind of, filled out ways, ways to intentionally use obfuscation to make the program harder to read. And it's kind of a joke at this person's expense of like, oh yeah, here, let's write your smile 6 times on the screen program using templates and all these other, in some cases maybe outdated or unusual programming languages. I think if you dig deep enough, there's an assembly one and so on. But what I like about this is that it helps draw attention to there are so many different ways to do things. The world of programming is a bottomless pit of knowledge, or of art, or of design, or whatever it is. And so if instead of thinking of it as, I need to learn everything there is about programming, or I need to learn everything there is about even my programming language, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's C#, whether it's C++, there is a deep well of learning that you could do over your lifetime before you could even start on something. And so instead what I encourage is to find those few patterns that you can keep reusing in many different variations to achieve your goal of there's this thing I need made and I need to make it work, and I need it to be in a simple enough format that I can handle writing it. Okay, so this is the same reason why in another recent video, how to code many objects particle fundamentals, right? Here's a case where I'm showing how to use a lazy, just dynamically sized array in JavaScript to have an arbitrary number of objects on screen moving at once, right? And this could apply to shots, power-ups, items, whatever. Now, depending on how you're writing your program, right, there's a ton of different ways that you can use different data structures to optimize them for better addition and removal, for better spatial collision detection, etc. But for 95 some odd % of the cases that come up in small gameplay programming, an array is fine, or a list is fine if you're in Unity, or in the case of JavaScript, this sort of array that can dynamically size works just fine, right? Rather than getting stuck on what's the special array or technique or data structure I can pull down from my reference book to make this the perfect way I can do it, which is going to take you longer to debug, take you longer if you get stuck. Instead, if you pick that, okay, there's one really simple pattern that I apply. Whenever I need multiple of something and I'm not sure how many I'm going to need, here's the pattern I apply to that. That's going to get you across the line 90 some odd % of the time, maybe better than 90% of the time, in which it never becomes worth going back to optimize or refactor or whatever, because at most there's a few dozen on screen at once, or at most there's, a dozen collisions being detected against it or whatever, and it's simple enough. You can do it very quickly with minimal cognitive overhead, right? You're not getting tied up on getting stressed out about how to solve this innovative, unusual challenge. You're able to focus at the higher level of what are you doing with your game by recombining these few fundamentals that you've practiced and drilled and become very comfortable at. So again, in the case of like the wrestling thing where this all starts, is the idea that rather than being the kind of person who every single week wants to become familiar with a different technique, a different approach, a different whatever, and it's slightly different from my previous video where I said pick an approach and stick to it, because this is saying that even within an approach, even within a programming language, even within an art tool that you choose, find the 3 or 4 or 5 or maybe 10 things, overall chunks or patterns that in different combinations are going to allow you to do the things you want to do. Beyond that, if and when there's a reason to dig into a special case, you can dig into it and you can step back from it. So to jump for a second completely out of the world of high school and collegiate wrestling, there's a case where Escher, MC Escher, right? Absolute marvelous genius, right? He does the stairs with the floors on the relativity. He does the geometric tile patterns that turn into birds and fish, and he does the just amazing deformed spatial pictures that turn from inside to out and whatever, right? Now, a lot of people, I've got this book buried somewhere in my boxes or whatever, of MC Escher's lecture notes. And one of the things he mentioned in a talk was a lot of people had assumed incorrectly that Escher was a mathematical genius, right? That in order to plot these things, because those are like carvings he did as prints, okay? He carved those out. He would, pencil draw grid deformations on things to plot out his things, and for some of his stuff involved crystallography or whatever. And people would assume like, oh my goodness, there's so much going on up in that brain. Part of Escher's secret, part of what made it possible for him, was his technique was to rapidly learn what he needed to learn to make a certain piece work. He would learn just enough crystallography or just enough deformation math or whatever to achieve a piece, and then dump it out of his brain and move on to the next thing. His purpose was not to go out and first learn everything there was to learn about math and visual transformations and then apply them to pictures. His approach was, what's the picture I want to make right now, and what can I pull into my brain long enough to hold it there to do for this, and then step away and change it, do something else with it, right? And that's the sort of thing that with game designers especially, gameplay programmers too, we see happen all the time, where no matter what kind of game you're working on, you need to quickly acclimate yourself to, this is a new or different kind of puzzle. This is a new and different kind of challenge to be building for. And so you pile up what's the special information for this case, but not with the intent to hold it forever, not with the intent to become the dictionary or the encyclopedia, but to know it long enough to apply it to your current situation, and then to clear that RAM so it's free for the next thing. The only stuff you kind of keep underneath all that, and again, my metaphors are everywhere, right, is back to that point of a few rearrangeable fundamental patterns. What are the few tools? What are the few things that if you just click them in Photoshop, you might not get the world's best picture. You might not be getting the picture in the most, the fewest clicks possible or whatever. But more importantly, you're able to just focus on what picture do I want. I can mash it out. I can make it happen. And you can produce a high volume of art to fill a whole game of models, a whole game of textures, a whole game of sprites, etc. Okay? So anyway, that's it for now. Chris DeLeon here for GamKeto. If you want to work with us in the club, by all means, check out gamketo.club. As always, Chris DeLeon here. Look forward to playing the games in the future you're going to make. Thanks.